Welcome to the Education Podcast, where it's all about helping you unleash your greatness. Hey. Welcome to our podcast episode. I'm your host, Pasitawa Haufano. In this episode, I interview a man by the name of Sean Bailey, who is the founder and owner of EmpowerYou, which is a leadership consultancy going around helping people who are in the education space or in business to become better leaders. In this episode, he shares with us 5 actions that you can start taking right now to become better leaders. This man is someone you definitely want to listen to and look up to. He has over 25 years of experience in the education space. He has led diverse and different primary schools. He's been a principal, and he shares in this podcast his personal journey, his story as well, and how he experienced a life-threatening challenge. But regardless, with all the pains and challenges he experienced, he's able to convert that all into a meaningful purpose where it's all about helping other people become empowered, better leaders, and better versions of themselves. Stick around and learn how you can start becoming a better leader. Get your pen and paper ready and get ready to take some notes. But before we get into that, here's a message from Education. Are you an organization that is looking for training programs to help upskill your people, whether it be leadership skills, communication, confidence, workplace literacy, numeracy, or maybe it's financial money skills? We can help. Education provides quality training programs that have been tested and true, or we can create training programs that are specific and bespoke to your needs. Get in touch and let us help you grow your organization by growing your people. You can call us on 027-300-2253 or visit our website www.zeducation.co.nz. Awesome, Sean. Thank you for joining us on our Education podcast. We've got Sean Bailey here, founder and owner of EmpowerYou, which is a leadership consultancy. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast, my friend.
Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, hey, we like to start off with the icebreaker question, as we always do with all our special guests. And my one for you is, what is one of the best pieces of advice that someone has ever given you?
Okay. As I said, it's great to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to talk and have a conversation today. Really appreciate that. I think having been involved in education for 25 plus years now, obviously I've been guided and mentored and coached by a number of incredible people throughout that time. And if I look back, there's probably one person who's had a major impact on my career, and he was a former principal, and his name was Pete Bradley. And back in 2016, I had the opportunity to set up a brand new school post the Christchurch earthquakes. And Pete was my coach and mentor, and we often would meet up, and he would remind me of a lot of things in terms of leadership, having had a lot more experience than what I had had. And he often used to talk to me about the importance of running my own race. And I really like that term and expression. And what he was meaning by that is to continue running your journey the way you think is important, and not comparing your journey to somebody else's, especially being a leader. Look, I really appreciated this advice because I think it allowed me to focus on my goals and intentions and not getting stuck in what other people were doing, and getting really clear around what those are, and doing what's best for me as a leader and my community, because I think sometimes you can be influenced by what other people are doing, and you might feel a bit envious of what they're doing, or you might think that they're ahead of you. And I think everybody is on their own journey, and it's really as important, as I said, to continue running your race in terms of being a leader. So I think that's really valuable advice to be able to take forward in terms of your career. So that was awesome, that advice from Pete Bradley. Yeah.
That's some awesome advice. I really like that. And I hope our audience can see the value in that and how that's helped you become the leader that you are today. And I think it is important, that authenticity, and staying true to who you are and not letting other people's opinions or what they're doing kind of bring you down. But
Yeah,
it's
totally.
like finding your purpose, finding what matters most to you, and allowing that to be part of your personal journey, eh?
Totally.
Well, thank you for sharing that piece of advice. Would love to learn a little bit more about you. I know you've got a journey, and on this podcast, we're going to talk about the 5 actions that leaders can take now to start improving their leadership. But before we get into that, we want to learn a little bit more about Sean Bailey, his personal leadership journey, and your story. So tell us a little bit about that, my friend.
Yeah, cool. Looking back, I don't think I ever saw myself as a leader earlier on in my career. And I think that's what it can be like when you're just getting off the starting blocks. As I said, I've been in education for 25 plus years. However, as my career developed, I began to take on more responsibilities as a teacher, first and foremost. And what happened was over time, I started building up a kite of experiences and knowledge and skills, which gave me, I think, the confidence to be able to apply for and get the leadership positions which came up throughout that time. So there's a couple of really key lessons here that I just wanted to share with the listeners. And I think the first one is sometimes it's about taking the small steps towards improvement that make the bigger difference. I think sometimes there's a risk of thinking too wide sometimes, for example, where you want to go as a leader. But I think one of the learnings for me over the years is actually it's the small steps that create the path towards the bigger action or intention at the end. So that's been a really huge learning. Also, I think the more experience you have as being a leader, the more confident you have in your ability to lead. And I know that looking back on my leadership career, I'm a whole lot more confident, for example, now than I was or have been in the past. And I think it's just like anything that you take on, the more practice you have at doing something, the better you become at it. And okay, so there's that whole sense of being not only a leader, but I think more importantly, a learner, because even at my stage of my career and what I'm doing now, I'm still learning and growing and developing. So I think the lesson there is for people who want to aspire, for example, to become leaders, is you've got to start somewhere. And often it's through those small steps towards improvement that make the biggest difference, but also needing to sometimes learn and make mistakes. And that's just part of the whole learning process as well. So never be worried about making mistakes, because we all make them. But I think the greatest amount of learning that can often happen is from those mistakes. And often when I'm working with leaders now, it's like, don't be worried to take some risks and have a go. Don't be prepared to get it right all the time, but learn from the mistakes that you make. So I think that's a really, really important point to make there. I've had the awesome opportunity to be working alongside a lot of great leaders throughout my career. And one particular person, if I look back on, her name was Denise Torrey, and she's currently the principal of Summerfield School here in Otatahi, Christchurch. She's been in the school leading for around 20 plus years now, and you might think that's a long time, but she's actually carried out a lot of other projects and initiatives during that time to be able to still sharpen her sword. But she taught me a great deal about leadership and provided me with some awesome opportunities to lead. So I think sometimes you need those people in your corner to continue inspiring you, because as a leader, it can be really challenging and hard and difficult sometimes. But I think one thing I've learned is actually to surround yourself with a really great group of people who you can continue to be inspired by and learn from. So I don't think it doesn't matter what age you are. I just think you need to continue to do that. Look, back in 2011, I won my first principal position. So up until that time, I've carried out lots of different leadership roles in schools. And my role at Summerfield was actually a deputy principal. So then I decided, hey, let's give the principalship thing a crack. And look, I really enjoyed leading a school of 6 teachers, which was my first school. The name of the school was Ladbrokes. But then in 2015, another really great challenge came up. And I applied for and won a position to start up a brand new school. So after the Christchurch earthquakes, there was a lot of uncertainty, but there was a lot of, turned out to be a lot of optimism around growth and development in terms of what was coming ahead. And the Ministry of Education decided to build some new schools based on where the population was moving to. And so I had the opportunity, as I said, to apply for and get a role in that school to lead it as a foundation principal. And I think that was a big move for me, because I'd come from a smaller school and I was going to be involved in leading a big organisation that was potentially going to grow to 750, 800 learners. So that was a big undertaking. And I think sometimes as leaders, it's important to keep moving and keep changing and be able to develop and improve. And I think that's something that I've always tried to do, and back yourself while you're doing that as well. But as you know, sometimes challenges get in the way, and when you're leading and what you want to do, and I'm sure your listeners have all experienced times like that when it doesn't all go according to plan, because we know that life just doesn't work like that sometimes. This was certainly the case for me. So about a year into leading the school, I got really sick. I was running a half marathon and I had to end up by having open heart surgery. I collapsed during that half marathon and found out that I had an aortic valve that was closing up at quite an alarming rate. So I needed to get in and have open heart surgery as quick as I could. So that was the first thing that happened. And then I got a major bowel disease in 2018. So there were some things that got in the way of me wanting to continue to lead the way I wanted to. And actually it came to the stage where I thought I needed to stop and get off the leadership bus for a while and get well and focus on my wellness, because I'm no good if I'm not well when I'm leading. And I think that, again, that's another key lesson for leaders, is actually you have to be fit and well to be able to lead effectively. And so I made that courageous decision to resign from that position. You know, I could have gone back. The board were quite willing to give me some leave to recover and get well again. But I decided that, hey, maybe it was after like 4.5 years time to have a change. And one thing I've always been really interested in is supporting other people and helping them to grow as leaders. So while I was recovering, I decided, hey, let's have a crack at starting up my own business, my own leadership consultancy and company, and be able to do that. So develop a really clear vision for what I wanted to do going forward and purpose, and then being able to use that to set up my company and be able to support other leaders. And so that's what I decided to do. So as I said, it was a big call, but I think it was the right one. Who knows? I might head back into principalship one day, but at the moment, it's really cool what I'm doing, and I'm really enjoying being able to support lots of different leaders throughout New Zealand, not only in education, but also in businesses and organisations outside of education, which has been great. Yeah, it's awesome. Going really well.
Wow, Sean. Thank you for sharing that. Just listening to that whole journey there's a lot to unpack here that we can learn from, that our listeners can take away. And I think one of the big things that are standing out for me is, because you called leadership as a journey, and it's a personal journey, and everyone's journey is a little bit different. And you talked about taking the small steps. You know, we might have this big vision, but, you know, it's not about racing to the finish line, right? Go at your own pace. Go what works best for you as well and for your team as a leader and as a person. And it's more about the direction, going in the right way, than it is about getting there fast, you know, not rushing there, right? You got nothing to prove. And it's all about improving yourself along the way. And you talked about the journey. There's ups and downs in the journey. Doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, in terms of your leadership experience as well. There's ups and downs. And you talked about one of the big things that help you get through that is having personal coaches or mentors there, being part of a community, a collaborative community where you can get the support that you need, the guidance that you need. And, you know, you've got 25 years of experience in the education industry, and you've got leadership, education, working with young kids as well. You know, you're this well-rounded person here, a lot of good experience. Then eventually, you know, you took on more leadership roles. So I assume, you know, there would have been like some you had to learn and fill in those shoes eventually by growing into it, right? So it's not like, oh, you're perfect, so here's a role for you, right? Because you've got all the skills. It's like, no, I'm going to take the challenge. I don't know everything yet, but eventually I will grow and eventually get there. That's the mindset that you had, which is awesome, right? And then to go through life and then having this health challenge, this life challenge, right? And the school would have given you a chance to come back, just give you leave, but I'm going to prioritize my health. I'm going to prioritize this. It's important for me as a leader to be fit physically, mentally, emotionally, in order to lead, right? And you've taken that step, and then out of that, you've created this business, EmpowerYou, and I want to say you're recovering, but I'm saying it's more like you're taking advantage of this time here. You're converting this pain or this challenge into something that has more purpose and meaning, and you're giving back to others, and you want to help them. Well, empower you. It's in the name. You want to empower them to become better leaders. So what a journey! Some great lessons there for our listeners. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, I wanted our listeners to understand that, this person, Sean Bailey, that's on our podcast, has a story, has a journey as well as a leader, and everyone else, just the same, who's listening, has their own journey, leadership journey as well. So thank you for sharing it with us. I know there's a lot of people out there talking about leadership, having this passion to develop others, but I'd like to, before we get into the 5 actions that leaders can take now to improve their leadership, let's define what leadership is. In your opinion, Sean, what does leadership mean to you?
Okay, so that's a really great question, and I think it's a question that leaders need to continue to ask themselves, because what I've found throughout my leadership career is my definition of leadership maybe has morphed and developed and grown throughout that time. So it's not like you develop one definition and it will last the distance. So I think it's something that you need to keep working on in terms of really clearly defining what your specific definition is. And I talked before about the importance of developing a really clear vision and purpose for what you're doing, the uniqueness of you and what you've got to offer. So I think when I look at my current definition of leadership, obviously, the name of my company, as you stated before, is EmpowerYou. So it's about being able to empower and influence others in a great way around what I think is a common vision and belief around what's important with what they're doing. So having some of those guiding values and principles that allow leaders, for example, to be able to continue to pivot and develop and continue to be the best version of themselves, because as I stated before, it's a learning game and you're continuing to grow and develop in that leadership space. But I think if you take often the focus away from you and put it more onto what you have to offer others in terms of service and being able to help and support, I think that's really, really important. And I also think that that's where you gain the greatest amount of satisfaction around your purpose. It's really fulfilling when you're able to continue to help others. You'll know that by running Z Education. It's upskilling, supporting, educating others to be the best version of themselves. And when you have the ability to do that, that's incredible, eh? That's just awesome. And it makes you want to continue to grow and develop even further. So that gives you some thinking around what my current definition of leadership is.
I absolutely love that. Leadership equals influence, right? Like empowering and influencing others to do great things. I love that definition. And when it does come to leadership or leaders, we get so caught up doing things, just busy, running meetings, doing this, doing that task, and we forget to, hey, I like what you said there around asking yourself that question: what is leadership continually? It's the same as asking yourself, how can I better influence and empower others? So I really like that. And it's about taking time to better ourselves as leaders. That should be an going thing. And I think it's easy to like let that fall to the wayside because we're so caught up in the busyness of just doing things.
Absolutely.
So very, very good advice there. So, hey, let's get into the 5 actions that leaders can take now to start improving their leadership. So I'm very excited for this. Maybe let's start with the first 3. Take us through them.
Sure. This is a great thing to, again, continue to focus on in terms of your role as a leader, because you want to continue, as we've stated already, to continue to be impactful and have an influence on other people. I think number 1, these aren't necessarily in order, but I think one of the most important roles of a leader, as I mentioned before, is to grow and develop the ability of others. So a great leader, I believe, looks for the strengths and talents of members of their team. So there's lots of different ways, obviously, that you can go about doing that. But I think more importantly, a great leader creates opportunities to develop and enhance those capabilities that they see in others. And I think, having done a lot of that in my career, it's about building leadership capabilities within others. And then you can focus on what we term in terms of education, which is another great skill, is collaborative leadership. So yes, you may have a leader of an organization, but it's also about gathering other leaders together and being able to learn from each other as well. So that's a really, really important skill. Another action is being responsive to issues and challenges, I think, that come up in an organization. And then working alongside your team to be able to solve and work through these problems and challenges. And as you know, that often takes skills and practice. But I think, you want to start focusing on within your organization, there's always going to be problems, but try and reframe it as in, what are the real problems worth solving that we've got here? So actually being able to clearly define those. Otherwise, sometimes, you get stuck in the weeds down the bottom and you get caught up in the stuff that perhaps isn't focused on growth and improvement. So I think the challenge there is to continue to rise up out of there and to start thinking, hey, listen, what are some of the decent problems or the great problems that we want to develop here as an organization? Look, I've always really valued the importance of ongoing feedback around performance. So I think this would be my number 3 in terms of improving productivity and engagement. I personally don't believe that people can improve and get better and develop unless they're given ongoing feedback by other leaders in their organization. So I just think that needs to be built in to the improvement process. And I also believe it's a leader's responsibility to monitor progress related to often like specific goals and actions that might be defined. Like, people generally like to have a focus, don't they, in terms of what they're learning and what they're developing. And so once those have been framed up, it's a leader's responsibility to be able to work alongside that team member and be able to give them feedback around those goals. And I think the other thing too, when you're goal setting and forming actions, I think that's a process that often you don't want it to be done to somebody. Like, it has to be really collaborative. So, looking back on my past experience working with team members to co-construct goals together. So there's alignment, and the goals and actions are really purposeful for the development of the organization. So I think that's really important. So feedback, number 3, or the importance of feedback for number 3. I think another key action around improvement is for leaders to be the change they want to see in the world. And I really like that quote or that expression. And it's basically saying, when we unpack it, that a leader has to be a role model in regards to improvement. And they are the ones that make the biggest difference in that space, because as a leader, you are continually being analyzed, sometimes judged in that space. And so it's really important to pull from often for example, your personally held values that you have in terms of what you believe is really important, and then being able to use those to be able to influence others in a great way. But sometimes, as you know, leadership, as I stated before, is really complex and challenging. I think the challenge for leaders is consistency, to be able to continue to role model those, those expectations around behavior or performance. And that's just part of the role, because people do look up to leaders, and those leaders provide a great deal of inspiration to others in regards to improvement. So being the change you want to see in the world, that term is really important, and being consistent in that space as well. So look, I think the last one, number 5, and I've reflected a lot on this, like people generally spend a lot of time at work if they're committed to an organization. And so I think it's really important that leaders provide an environment that is really engaging and inspiring. Now, maybe, you may think, oh, okay, we've moved into these new offices and it's a really nice environment to be working in. But I think it's actually more than that. It's like, what else is happening in regards to the people space or the development space that is allowing people to continually be inspired and motivated and engaged? And I think, again, it's a leader's responsibility to be able to keep thinking about those strategies that, and reading the team, what do they need? What do they want? And being able to program those things in order to keep motivation at a great level. And I just think when a leader does that, it's like a win-win situation, isn't it? In terms of a leader wins because they're obviously going to get a great deal more productivity out of their team members because they're feeling inspired and motivated. But the people then will want to come to work, they'll want to wake up at the beginning of the day and get to work because the leader really cares about them and provides an environment where they're continued to be inspired and motivated in that space. Now, again, that's something that a leader needs to continue working on and driving. And often that comes down to, when I'm working with groups and organizations, getting really clear around what are those practices that are really important to our organization, and so, looking after employees' well-being, providing a fun and engaging and enjoying an environment that's enjoyable. All of those practices really, really count towards the overall culture that I think you establish in a company. So, there's some thoughts just to consider and ponder to go forward.
That's some great actions that leaders can start taking now. I'd like to dig a little bit more into the how part, the how conversations around some of this, not all of it. I think one of the things that really stuck out to me, I like to dig a little bit more into, is around the strengths piece, right? As a leader, I definitely agree with you. I believe you need to know your team. You need to know them. And that includes knowing their strengths and their weaknesses. So as a leader, let's say you've got a team of 12 people. Where do you start? How do you start understanding and learning more about what they're good at, or their strengths, their weaknesses? And then how do you go from there to helping them grow it even further?
That's a really good question. And I think as a leader, sometimes one thing that I think can be forgotten about is the importance of getting to know the members of your team first and foremost. So spending valuable time building the connections and relationships with members of your team, because I think in the busyness of organizations, sometimes it's like, today we need to get X, Y, and Z done. Do you know what I mean? And it's not, you go and do the work, but we often don't know enough about actually what does motivate our team to work, or what strengths they do have that we could be delegating to them that maybe other people may not have the strengths to do. So it's about getting to know your team members. And so I think induction and initiation processes that leaders and organizations put into place, you've got to spend some valuable time and mahi in that space to be able to, as I said, get really, really clear around your team members and what they have to offer. I think looking back on my past leadership experiences, if I was to do some things differently, some of the learning I've been doing currently is around some some personality profiling. I've just taken part in some DISC training, so I've become a DISC trainer. So it's about gathering data and information again to be able to really get a clear understanding, or as much as you can, because I think some of those tools are never going to be 100% reliable, but they give you a really good indication of what people's strengths are, for example, and maybe some things that they need to be working on. So using reliable data, but often that data is not used enough in organizations. So it might be collected, but I think the challenge for leaders is to continue to unpack that data and use it in order to build the strengths within the organization. And so I think you talked about a team of 12. When you're working or you have a team of 12 people, they're all going to have different strengths and abilities. And I think sometimes it's really important to identify and know what people's strengths are. So I think, again, that could be a leader's responsibility to say, hey, listen, we're working on this project. We're going to give this part to team member X because that's where his or her strengths lie. And so being really, really clear and using that data that I talked about before, let's say from the personality profiling, to be able to back that up. Because then if you do that, you're going to avoid things like favoritism, for example. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes that can and does happen in organizations too, where people are given responsibilities because they may be doing things that the leader wants, but not necessarily based on reliable data to be able to say, hey, listen, you need to be doing that because that's where your skill set lies. Yeah. So I think the data and information gathering, especially at the beginning, whether you're starting a new business or company or you're bringing new people on board, I think that is really important. But then being able to continue to use that data as well. Yeah.
I love that. So, it's important for us as leaders to get to know our people, and that requires heart and it also requires time. And if you're not spending time, you need to find time, right? Because if you're not spending time with them, you're not connecting with them, right? So that's so important. That's one way that you can go about to connect and get to know your people, what their strengths are and what matters to them, what drives them, what motivates them, right? And then there's tools that Sean mentioned. You've got DISC, you've got Myers-Briggs, you've got assessment tools out there to help you better understand, just to give you at least a baseline, right, on what some of their strengths and their weaknesses might be. Okay, so that way you can avoid favoritism. You're not being biased, right? You're delegating the right things to the right people for the right reasons, and that's so important. I love that, Sean. Can you talk a little bit more around challenges? Because we know challenges are normal. They come and go in different shapes and forms, especially at individual for a leader or as a team collectively, right? When challenges come, right, and you talked about reframing it, right, in a more productive and positive way, how do you go about making that mind shift for not just for yourself, but for your team? How do you make that as part of the normal culture?
Well, as we know, challenges, as I said before, exist in every organization. But I think what makes the difference is how leaders go about managing or leading during those times when challenges do exist. And I think if I look back again on my past leadership experience and what I'm doing now with leaders, I often use a term, be responsive. So as a leader, you're, as you know, continuing to think ahead. You can usually sense when things aren't right, for example, within an organization. It won't just happen straight away. Sometimes things do, where you have to act. But usually if there's something that's been bubbling or boiling away, a leader, their job is to be able to sense what's happening in terms of the particular challenge, and then start thinking how they're going to go about dealing with that challenge. And I think sometimes when challenges are happening within an organization, sometimes things can get personal in that space. And I think it can become about me and my needs and what I'm wanting during that time. And so I think the call to courage there within leadership is when the challenges occur is actually to have the conversations and bring the team together and start redefining what is really important for the organization. So it's like a gathering together of the tribe and actually sitting down and unpacking, actually, what are we about here? So coming back to your vision, either your values or principles and your practices, and then just having a bit of a kickstart again, or a get back to normal type situation where people can then go back to how they were before. But often that's a leader's responsibility in order to do that, instead of burying your head in the sand sometimes when challenges and issues happen within an organization. So I think that's really important, to come back to your vision, your values and beliefs, and what's important. But I think too, it's really important to have some processes in place. For example, being able to have open to learning, brave or courageous conversations with your team members, because all leaders have to have those conversations. And so it's about knowing how to have those conversations, how they're framed up, what's going to lead to a great outcome or a good outcome, as good an outcome as you can, and being able to know that personalities haven't been ruined, or people's feelings haven't been tarnished, in terms of when disagreements happen within an organization. So again, keeping the focus on improvement and focusing on what is important to people within the organization as well. So I think it's about having a kite of different resources and processes that you can draw from when you are dealing with the challenges as well, and being able to use those and role model those to your team members as much as possible.
I really love that. I love how you talked about process quite a bit there, and around having it as part of the BAU when challenges come, because they come and it's normal. We have to expect that they come, but what's our go-to process when they do come, right? And everyone's on the same page. It's not personal, because like you said, conflict can become personal. So how do we not take it too far to the extreme? And processes can come in handy. And the other thing that you talked around is around realignment and bringing them back to what matters most, the vision, the values, and what it's all about. And let's argue, or let's not argue, but let's try and solve the problem towards achieving those most important things that matter the most. Right? So it's
definitely
avoid the blaming game, and let's focus on what matters most. I love that, because then that helps them to be more solution focused than problem focused.
Totally.
I loved how you talked around being the change that you want to see. And I think it is important to lead by example. And you talked around improvement, right? If you want others to improve and you want that to be part of the culture, you have to do it yourself. What are you improving on? What are you working on? What goals are you working on? What's driving you? Because when people see that, it's contagious as well, right?
Totally.
So I know leaders can get so busy and come up with all the reasons and excuses in the world to say, I don't have time for personal development or to improve, because I've got to do that for other people. I've got results that I'm accountable for, and I can't afford to neglect that. But we know personal development should be an important thing that all leaders need to do consistently. So with someone who has an excuse around, I don't have enough time, what's your advice around that?
Yeah, I think sometimes when you are working on new projects, or there's some new learning to be done within an organization, what I've seen work most effectively, and often I've done my best to role model this behavior as well, is actually learn with your team. So for example, if you were focusing on some te reo or tikanga practices and processes with across the organization, being part of that learning with your team as well. I think that's a really great skill as a leader, to actually demonstrate to your team that you are learning and growing and improving as well. Because I think sometimes leaders distance themselves, and they may go and work on other things while the team are learning. And so it creates a bit of a disconnect. And I think at times like that, even though you may know a lot of what's been taught already, I think it just gives a really good impression that you're willing to roll your sleeves up and be a learner and learn with your team as well. And so when they have those conversations in the staff room or the smoko room, you can be part of those conversations, in terms of, I found that really challenging yesterday when we had that professional development. You can engage with them more where you are actually being or demonstrating to them that you're a learner. I just think that's a really, really important skill as a leader.
I love that, because it reminds me of what you said earlier around collaborative leadership. And collaborative doesn't just mean let's get together when there's a problem or when we need to solve something. It's like, let's even get together for the fun and the learning things as well. Let's
totally.
be collaborative. I love that. I love that. Leading by example and learning with your team. That's awesome. One last thing I want to touch on, because honestly, I love all the 5 actions you've shared. You've provided a lot of value so far. I'm excited to share this podcast. But just to wrap things up here, I love to talk a little bit more around the feedback, because we know as leaders, sometimes it can be quite difficult to frame things up where people don't get offended or don't get, don't feel insulted or feel like they're being blamed or picked on. And vice versa, even for the leader. We don't want to be very defensive, protective to the point where we don't listen to feedback. Like, how do you as a leader create an environment where people feel safe and vulnerable enough to be open and honest to give feedback?
I think it's around, again, being able to demonstrate as a leader how you go about doing that yourself. And I look back on my experience, I've been mentored and coached by other experienced leaders. And so being able to talk to my team about the learning that's often happened and the importance of the feedback that I've received in order to improve. And I think if you, again, role model those practices and processes, that's really impactful for your team. I think feedback can be interesting. And I talked before about the importance of setting really clear goals and intentions or actions with your team members. And I think there's a risk of feedback being given sometimes that doesn't necessarily relate to those goals and actions. And so it may be about something totally unrelated. So I think, again, it's about being focused on what it is that you're working with, either a team member or a group of people within your team, and being really, really clear around what it is that the goal's about and what the actions are going to be related to that, and then keep the focus of the feedback on those things, and not give feedback about lots of different things. Keep it focused on actually what is it that they are learning and wanting to improve. And I think that's really important, because there's no surprises then. It's like, actually, and that's the other thing too, providing ongoing opportunities to sit down with your team members to provide the feedback. So scheduling regular opportunities for that to happen. So feedback just becomes part of the learning culture within your organization, and it's not something foreign that's just done every now and then. So again, it's about the consistency. It's like, providing regular opportunities to engage with your team and be able to sit down with them and talk about their learning and give them feedback about that. And I think when you operate like that as a leader, look, you can't go wrong, because people, they get it, they understand it. And there's, as I said before, there's no surprises, because the feedback is really specific to actually what their goals are. Yeah, so I think there's some great learning to happen in that space.
I love it. I love it. And you want feedback that's relevant feedback, right? And how do you make that feedback relevant? Like you said, having it focused on the goals, and how we're tracking in terms of progress versus those goals. And so as a leader, it's important for us to understand what those goals are our team aligned with it? And am I tracking it myself, right? And framing and facilitating that conversation and feedback around that, rather than things that are irrelevant. And yeah, so I really love that. And I think you mentioned the word there, consistency, which is probably the key theme here around making these actions work. It's not enough to just tick box them and say, I've done it. Like, you've got to have it as part of your processes, your to make it ongoing. All right. So the only way you're going to be successful and making these actions happen is consistency. So I love that. I think that's a great way to wrap up this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing those 5 tips. And just a reminder for our listeners out there, remember the 5 actions that you can start taking now to start improving your leadership, which includes knowing your team, what are their strengths, and how do I further develop those strengths? How do I be responsive to challenges, and how do I frame it up in a way that's productive and exciting for the team to take and tackle on? And creating an environment where we can give feedback and where we can receive feedback, because we need that feedback to improve, right? And not taking it on as a personal attack, but for personal improvement. And it's important for us to model that as a leader. Be the change that you want to see in the world, right? Lead by example. People are watching, okay? So it's important for us to model what we want them to do as well. And then also creating an environment. Creating the environment is the last one. That's inspiring, engaging, empowering for others. Thank you so much, Sean. We've learned so much here in this podcast. So much for our listeners out there that they can start doing practically today to start improving their leadership. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us on this podcast. Is there any final words of advice that you love to leave with our listeners?
Look, I think part of our responsibility as leaders who have been in the system for a while is to continue to upskill and engage emergent leaders to have a go at leadership. So, that's the call to courage, and always think about, never doubt your ability to lead. I think it's something that we want to encourage and inspire more people to have a go at. And I think, as I said before, when you have got great support around you in order to lead, you can't go wrong, because those are the people who maybe have got more experience than you, but they're there to teach you around from some of the lessons that they've learned over the years as well. So thanks for the opportunity to be part of your podcast today, Pasi. It's been really great, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you for your time, Sean Bailey, founder and owner of EmpowerYou. Thank you for empowering us today.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.